All right, friends, welcome to this very special edition of Ask the Captain. We put out a video a few days ago about Midnight Hammer, and we've gotten quite a response to that video. Many of your questions we're going to attempt to answer in this special episode. I want to say something first, though, up front. Here at the Captain Steeeve channel, we do not get political. We do that on purpose, and I don't want to put anybody off one way or another. Our talking about this mission was from the aviation side and the airplane-related things that went with it. That's for another part of the internet to discuss, the politics of it, and we don't want to get wrapped up in that. So I want you to understand, even though I am an American and I flew for our military, I want to try to be as kind of Switzerland on this whole thing as possible going forward. But your questions on this were absolutely excellent, and they deserve answers. So let's jump into the first question. Brooks Beller 2052 asks this question. Weird question, he says, but in those stealth bombers, I can't imagine there's a lot of room, if any, to move about the cabin. So how do the pilots relieve themselves during a 30-hour round trip? I imagine peeing in a bottle isn't too crazy, but what about the other business? Okay, that's true. Do they use a bucket, diapers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? Well, the answer to this is there are actually some living accommodations on a B-2. There is actually a toilet that gets used. It's a chemical toilet, but there's also a microwave. I think there's like a toaster oven on as well, and there are some sleeping facilities. Now, they're pretty rudimentary. On my airplane that I flew in the Navy, there was a rack in the back, and it was kind of like you would think of as a cot. It wasn't the most comfortable thing, but you could lay down, get horizontal, and go to sleep. And actually, I trained myself over those years to get some sleep on those things. I could kind of close my eyes and go to sleep, wake up 45 minutes or an hour later when my shift started. It's very important to have those rest facilities. They have those on a B-2. Excellent question. Next is Aviation Lover 1998. Hi, I'm from the UK. It was a very interesting mission, and I can't believe they managed to do it without it being leaked. How did the planes not show up on radar, and can they fly silently? So they're called stealth bombers for a reason. The technology on the outside of the airplane is designed to not reflect radar signals in a way that a traditional aluminum or airplane would reflect a radar signal. It kind of confuses it. There's lots out there on the internet about how stealth technology works. I don't have a degree in it, and I'm not going to try to get into it. It's just stealth, and it works. Now, can you see a B-2 and can you hear a B-2? Yes, you can. So are they completely stealth? No, anything you can see and hear, you can identify. Now, they came in the middle of the night. The pilot said it was one of the darkest nights they've ever seen. And in fact, when they dropped the bombs, they said they lit up the sky so effectively that it was like the brightness of day. So they'll always run their mission. They'll always drop their bombs in the middle of the night. That helps with the stealth package of a B-2, but that's a great question. Next is, let me see, Ushan MOAB 6142. Thanks so much for this breakdown. One thing that has puzzled me is how they managed to get some sleep when that much airtime is involved. Could you explain how it works? Well, there was racks in the back of the airplane. I can't imagine going over anybody got much sleep. I'd imagine that the adrenaline was pumping. These pilots are about to go on one of the most dangerous missions they've ever participated in. They had fighter cover as they were going closer to the target. But once they got close enough to the target, those fighters had to peel off because they can be seen on radar. They went and did their separate mission of getting rid of the surface-to-air missile sites. And those B-2 bombers were left vulnerable. They can't defend themselves. They're just bombers. They open up the bomb bay and out the bombs come. So that's very dangerous, very brave men and women on those airplanes. And again, I imagine the adrenaline was pumping. Most of the sleeping probably got done on the way back. I can imagine you're pretty exhausted. You have that adrenaline let down. And I'm sure whoever shift it was, once they got into their bed, they were probably out just like that. But again, this sort of missions are for young pilots, not old guys like me. And you recover pretty quickly from a couple of all-nighters in a row when you're young. Great question. All right. We've got Lynn Margastros. What happens to the plane when it drops those 2 bunker buster bombs? That is a lot of weight to lose at once. The pilot must have a steady hand to counter the significant weight shift. That's an excellent question because they were 30,000 pounds each. Each one of those B-2 bombers carried 2. That's 60,000 pounds. That's the equivalent of about 20 VW Beetles all at once. Open up, drop, out they go. They were most likely on autopilot when they dropped those bombs. They're probably not hand flying the airplane, although there would be a pitching moment in the airplane when something large would come out of it. In my airplane in the military, we had bomb bay doors. When we would drop something large and heavy, you'd get a pitching moment, but the autopilot usually steadies it out and takes care of it. They would want to get to a precise point that the GPS and the internal nav was taking them for the launching of those bombs. So the autopilot would get them there. Then they're going to turn around. Most of the flight is going to be done on autopilot because if the pilots had to hand fly basically 16 hours over and another 18 hours back, they would be absolutely exhausted. You got to have an autopilot that works, and that's how they did it. All right, we've got one by one. Excellent insight. Quick question. With Israel cleaning out the surface-to-air launchers, could it be that Israel was asked to do that prior to Midnight Hammer as a part of the preparations? If so, that would mean the military probably suspected this a week prior. What are your thoughts? Yeah, there's no doubt about that. I think when you're Iran and you see that your surface-to-air missile sites are getting taken out systematically, it's not a far stretch to imagine that something bigger is coming. In fact, there's evidence to support that because the intel now says that the Iranians actually tried to pour concrete over the air vents that they thought might be potential vulnerabilities for their sites. They tried to cover it up with concrete. I think General Kane just said the first bunker buster busted that up, and then the rest of them went down those shafts and caused significant damage. So I think they knew something was coming. I haven't heard anything about a loss of life. It doesn't mean that there wasn't over there, but I think they had a significant heads up. Hopefully they didn't move the uranium, but again, who knows? All of those things are things that will come out in the days and the weeks and the months ahead. Okay. Banks for Real Music 413. You mentioned 3 to 4 refuelings on the way to the target and 4 to 5 on the way back. It seems like there would be more refuelings during the ingress rather than the egress, considering that each B-2 was carrying 60,000 pounds of payload on the way over and 60,000 pounds lighter on the way back. I could be wrong, but I assume the lighter they are, the less fuel they burn. That is really a well thought out question. And you're not wrong about that. 60,000 pounds lighter coming back is significantly lighter. The bigger factor, other than the weight, is the headwind coming back. So when you go east, primarily, you've got a tailwind. When you come west, you've got a headwind. That's why the mission was probably, if it was 15 to 16 hours going over, it was 18 to 19 coming back because they'd be facing a headwind. That's what I'm basing my extra refuelings on. I have no idea how many refuelings they did on each way over. I'm just guessing at what I think the range of that aircraft is and how often they would have to refuel. It could have been many more. It could have been a couple less. I think it was more coming back rather than going over based on the headwind, not the payload. But excellent question. All right, we've got Tommy Turbo 1991. Captain Steve, I have a question for you. Is the GBU57 more powerful than a MOAB? Yes, but it's a different type of bomb altogether. The GBU57 is a bunker busting bomb designed to penetrate down deeply into the earth. I've heard between 200 and 290 feet altogether. The MOAB was designed to destroy surface things. It was not a bunker busting bomb. I think back in the day, back in the early Gulf War days, people said it was a bunker buster. It was not. It was not designed to penetrate the earth in that way. I think people called it the mother of all bombs. It was pretty big at the time. All right. This thing was designed specifically for this task. There was a scientist, an operator, and an assistant that has been working on this problem with the Iranian nuclear program for 15 years secretly in the U.S. And he realized that in order to get down in there and get rid of those centrifuges, we didn't have a bomb big enough, and we had to design a bomb from scratch. So the GBU57 was designed for exactly this mission, and by all evidence, it looks like it was successful in what it was intended or designed to do. There you go. All right. Now, the next is Trainer CTZ. I'd like to hear you guys talk about the fact that these GBU GBU57s hit the ground going between Mach 2.5 and 3. I'm not exactly sure the Mach speed of these things when they hit the ground. I heard that they were going 1,000 feet per second. So if you're an engineer or you're good at math, you can figure out 1,000 feet per second and what that translates into Mach, but they're going real fast, and they're designed not to disintegrate on impact, but to burrow on impact. The steel that those bombs were made out of is so hard that a majority of the weight of that bomb is just the casing, not the explosive on the inside. So they appear to have worked according to their design. Next is this Televish moniker 5546. Quick question. Did they actually turn around, or did they continue eastward around the globe and take a North Pole route? Probably came back the way they came due to the sensitivities and the political alignments to get them there. They would have had to negotiate some of those things prior to their advance. They most likely would come back that way. It would be the straightest way, since those countries had already given approval for overflight. When you go east from you run into places like Pakistan, India, China. There's lots of places that you would never get permission to overfly, and it would be much longer to go that way anyway. So, in a polar route, I don't think they did. I think they came back the same way, but that's a guess on my part. All right, but that's a good question. All right, we've got Gigi Puzutu 4068. Couldn't they use aircraft carriers to cut the flight shorter for the B-2 bombers? B-2 bombers are too big to land on an aircraft carrier. So the answer to that is nope. And did they launch some other airplanes, some assist airplanes from aircraft carriers? I didn't hear the general say that. They might have, but I think the F-22s and the F-35s are mostly land-based Air Force aircraft. It doesn't mean that they couldn't have taken off an aircraft carrier. I just don't think they did. All right, but that's an excellent question. Head Force Zero. I've heard that the B-2 shouldn't be used outside of war because the enemy could learn the radar characteristics of the plane. I've also heard it said it's a really bad day when a B-2 is used, as in it should only be used when absolutely necessary. Can you comment on this? Let me key on the absolutely necessary part. I served my country for 29 years. The youngest and most vibrant years of my life I gave in service to the military. I'm the last guy on the planet that wants to go to war. Absolutely. Why? Because I'm going to be one of the first to go, at least when I was on active duty. So the absolutely necessary is the key component here. You can debate, and the internet will debate whether this was necessary or not. I'm going to debate what the airplanes did and didn't do, what they could do, not what they should do. That's for a different discussion for another day. Was this absolutely necessary? I don't think anybody anywhere around the world is losing a lot of sleep over the fact that the Iranian nuclear program has been set back months or years. Now, that can be debated. Don't want to get into the should. I'm just talking here about the could, but that's an excellent question. Thank you for that. Wilbur Van Backel writes, thank you so much for helping us understand this operation. You're welcome. Right? That's what I'm here for. I can't help but wonder why this information is offered in a press conference. It's probably generic information, but my mindset is leaning towards no information. Thoughts? Well, here in a democracy, we share that information with the general public. Now, it was kept from the general public until it was over, but I'm impressed by General Kane. As the B-2s were still in the air returning, he was in front of a microphone giving us the preliminary assessment of this operation and letting us know that it took place. I appreciate that transparency from my elected and non-elected officials in this country. I think if they had kept this completely silent and wasn't talking about it, the conspiracy theories would go wild. Think about the internet these days. People would go crazy. What are they hiding? Why won't they tell us? The more information you get out, the sooner you get it out, the better. Now, there's still going to be a lot of debate about that, and people aren't going to feel good about it one way or another, but the should and shouldn'ts, that's for the other part of the internet. We're here to talk about the cans and can'ts. But that's an excellent question. Thank you for that. 760 Piper writes, I'd like to know what commercial pilots have to do if they find themselves in airspace that is in the midst of a conflict. I'm sure there were flights near where the raid took place. What action do they take? It might be pretty stressful. Well, I can tell you, because I've flown that part of the world many times. New York to Delhi, New York to Doha, places at Tel Aviv I've flown into several times. The airspace around Iran has been blocked off for decades. Nobody flies over Iran. You go around it. It makes the flight even longer. And so because of the war tensions and everything else in that region of the world, there is limited overflight of commercial jets. Now, commercial jets that do fly nearby, they have a certain squawk code that they transmit so that the people on the ground know it's a commercial airliner. I don't think the Iranians or anybody else want to shoot down an airliner by mistake. That would be very unpopular for them. And so basically it's done in two ways. That squawk code is one, but avoiding the area is another. So I don't think anybody got caught up in this. I think they had cleared everybody out well in advance of something like this taking place, even though it was secret. Good question. All right, I've got Daniel McCrawer, 5972. Who refuels them in air? The refuelers are KC-135s and KC-10s. I think they still use the KC-10s, but they're big airplanes and they're just full of fuel. And they get airborne, and they're an airborne gas station. And they've got a gas hose that comes out. They actually fly this thing with a little remote control, and they fly it down to the probe on the front of the B-2. The B-2 couples up with it. They match their speeds perfectly, and then they just refuel that aircraft. Once the refueling is done, they decouple, and they fly that thing back up to the jet, and they refuel the next B-2. They did that many times going over, and they did it many times coming back. It really has to say a lot about the skill and the training of our young pilots. They did a great job. Excellent question. Lord Nico, Steeeve has had a lot of good videos. Well, thank you, Lord. I appreciate that. And this may be the best. I don't know Steeve's full background, and I'm curious about his military aviator career. All right, I served for 29 years, 8 years on active duty, another 21 in the reserves. The main airplane I flew was an airplane called a P-3 Orion. And a P-3 Orion was kind of like a Swiss Army knife of an airplane. It was an old 4-engine turboprop. You might know it as the Lockheed Electra. It was built by the Lockheed Corporation. It was primarily back in the 70s and 80s and into the 90s, an aircraft that was designed to hunt submarines. But it was a Swiss Army knife in that it did a lot more than that. It had a bomb bay underneath of it. You could load bombs into that. So you could drop mines out of the airplane and you could mine the water. You could drop torpedoes out of it to go after a submarine or a ship. You had missiles on the wings that you could shoot at land targets. It did basically everything. It was pretty slow. It wasn't a B-2 by any estimation, but the missions that we flew were coordinated very similarly, very silent, very quiet. And all of those things were stuff that went into these missions. How could they have done this mission completely silently without any communication? I did many missions like that in the P-3. We would turn off all the external lights. We would have a pre-programmed time that we would depart from an airport. We would go take the runway. We would depart without ever talking to anybody. At a pre-prescribed point down the road, we would hit a single button that would send a squawk code, and then we would turn that mechanism off just to let everybody know we were airborne. We would go fly the entire mission for the 9 or 10 hours. We would then come back, and when we got back to the same point, we would turn the box back on, hit the squawk code one more time to let them know we were coming in, get everybody out of the way, and completely in silence and in the dark, you would land that airplane. Military missions have ways of communicating that don't involve the radios and don't involve traditional ways of communicating. I can't get into what all of those are. That was one that we use, but there are many, many more that we can't discuss here on this channel, but just trust me, it works. Great questions today, my friends. Thank you so much for your interest in this subject. I hope we treated it with the respect it was due. Again, we look forward to your comments in the comment section after this video. And if we got enough, maybe we'll put together another video with more of your questions. Now you know, I'm Captain Steeeve, and this has been Ask the Captain.